Hello, welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Alan Wyma, and today I have Omar Jennane, right? Is that how you say that?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Alan.
Yeah, you're the creator of Models, right? With a triple D.
Yeah. So the triple D comes from the domain-driven design, which is the main inspiration for the package. For those of you who are not familiar with domain-driven design, it's an app architecture that allows you to separate concerns. Like you have different layers for different things. But just a disclaimer, the package can be used by any developer and with any app architecture. It's um, it's coming from domain-driven design, but it can be applied everywhere.
Domain-driven design, I think that's mostly done with functional programming. Am I wrong?
There is some functional programming, like for example, you don't throw errors or exceptions. You you wrap them into failures that you return in an either type, the left of the either, and the right is where you store the actual return value of the function, for example. But it's not like delving too deep into functional programming. It's just some notions that you need only.
Well, maybe we can kind of define what is functional programming because I've heard people say functional programming is just using functions, which could be a little bit misleading, right?
Yeah, so I myself, I'm not a professional into things like functional programming because I only use the necessary things. I would like to learn more things about it, but really, it's just a matter of having all your classes immutable so that you don't have mutable classes and things like side effects. For example, some value or something changes and it causes unexpected bugs in your app. So there is that, there is immutability, and the fact that you don't throw errors, you always return them into failures. And there's also the declarative part, like it's it's uh, it's not imperative like having try catch blocks and things like that. You you have methods to handle, for example, the failures and the exceptions in a declarative way. You can't miss an exception. You'll always have to handle it because it's in the method.
Okay. That that makes sense, but I'm thinking to myself, I do functional programming basically every day, but I'm going to pretend like I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm going to ask you some questions. Um, I mean, if you think about it, right, what you said about the immutable data, I mean, life isn't like that, right? People, I mean, you have the example of a user with an age. We get older every day. We don't. Well, if you're in Beverly Hills with lots of money, maybe you can pay to have your age go backwards with plastic surgery, right? But in general, everybody just
Yeah.
gets older. So we don't really. I mean, we all change, right? So how is it that we can have a system that, of course, will have data that changes, but we still have immutable data? How does that work? Do you know?
So it's simple. Instead of changing your instance, you just create a new one with the updated data. And if you don't need the old instance, you don't hold into it. You just let it for the garbage collector to collect it. So it's just creating new instances every time the value changes, and then you can do whatever you want with that new instance. For example, if you have some UI, you update the state with the your new instances, or for example, if you have a server function that you send you use the new instance, and really it's just a matter of creating new instances every time the value changes.
Yeah, well said. I think they call that transformation, I believe, where you basically make a copy and then just change the one piece that you want, and then
Yeah, we have a really neat method for it. It's copy with.
yeah, and that comes from freeze, right? The copy with.
Yeah, it comes from freeze, but I hope that with static method programming, it's gonna become available with with all sealed classes. and immutable classes in Dart.
Yeah, sealed classes. I think maybe I can't remember what is that exactly. That's, I mean, sealed classes, from what I understand, is like a class within your class. Is that right?
So sealed classes is a class that has subclasses that are defined compile time. Like you could have, for example, a sealed class with a weather sealed class with the union case. The subclass classes are called union cases. Sunny weather and rainy weather. So it's defined. It's already defined ahead of time. So then what you can do is, if you have a weather instance, you can map between these different union cases compile time. So for example, you have a variable called weather. You'll do weather.map and have a callback for the sunny weather and another one for the rainy weather. That's what basically a sealed class is. Now with the Dart tree, you have a new syntax for sealed classes, and the pattern matching, you do it with the new switch case. But as for models, it doesn't use that yet. Maybe it will be supported in the near future, but it uses a syntax that is compatible with the Dart tree and as well as previous versions of Dart, just like freezed.
When you're saying that, it kind of reminds me of like a union type, no? To a certain extent. I mean, weather is going to be. I mean, weather is very vague, but then you say the weather could be sunny, cloudy, rainy, etc. It's very similar, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like the seal class fits right in with what this models library does, no?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a code generator that allows you to create self-validated objects. These objects are validated upon instantiation, like when you instantiate them, the validation is done. And they are also sealed classes that have different union cases depending on the validation state. So let's say for example, you have a username model. So it will be a sealed class with union cases valid username and invalid username. And then you have the benefit of handling these different validation states in a compile safe way, with compile time safety and type safety. Like you can't not handle, for example, an invalid username because it's empty or because it's too long or it has some characters that are not allowed, things like that.
So, okay, that makes sense. I mean, going through your examples and you walked me through a bit before the show. I mean, you're basically creating a new. So, I think the age one's a pretty good one, right? You talk about okay, there's an age. The validity is all about being old enough, a number, etc. But that's wrapped into an actual object called age, right?
Yeah, so I think I should bring up some concepts from domain-driven design. Like, uh, first of all, validation. It's about validating any type of data. Like, it could be coming from anywhere, from the user inputs, like a form, or it could be coming from a database, or the server, or some device sensors. Like, you can validate any type of data. And single pieces of values like username, age, email, these are encapsulated into classes that we call value objects. So these classes not only hold the value, for example, an age class will hold a property, an integer property for the value, but they also hold the validation logic. So for example, the same example of the age, you could have a validation logic that if the age is less than 18 years old, then it's invalid and you have a minor failure, like the user is a minor. Um, and also another important concept that comes from domain-driven design is that validation failures are explicitly declared as sealed classes. So, for example, for a username value object, you can have a username failure sealed class. So a sealed class called username failure with union cases such as the username failure.empty if the username is empty, username that too long, and things like that. So this was about the first concept, which is the concept of value objects, these classes that hold a single values. The second important concept is the one of entities. So entities are classes that group these values into a self-contained it's a contained unit, a self-contained unit. So, for example, you could have a user entity that contains value objects such as username, age, and email. So, for an entity to be valid, all the value objects and other entities it contains must be valid too. And you can also have some extra validation about the relationship between these values. I don't know if that makes sense, but let me find an example. For example, if you could say, for example, that if a user has such age and such username, then it's invalid. So it's also able to validate the relationship between the data. So these are the two main concepts that you need to know. It's value objects and entities. And with models, I wanted to push these two concepts further and make them available for all developers and not just those who are practicing domain-driven design. So I wanted to add things like self-validation, when you instantiate the object, it's validated upon creation. So you never deal with non-validated data. If you have, for example, a user instance somewhere in your app, it has been validated. You don't need to handle to say, oh, but what if it was, what if I don't have a username? What if the user doesn't have that? No, it's already have been validated. And I also wanted to bring compile time safety, for your user, you will be able to handle the different validation states in a compile safe way and also handle the failures in the same type safe and compile safe way. So everything is declarative. You get a user instance. You can do user.map and have a callback for the valid union case, another one for the invalid union case, and handle each case separately without any overhead and without saying what if I didn't handle all cases and trying to find some edge case that you didn't think about and things like that. No, everything is defined ahead of time, and you can handle each case with that peace of mind that functional programming brings in general.
Yeah, I really love that style. Like that reminds me of Elm. Have you played with Elm before?
What's that?
Oh, Elm is a programming language. Basically, it's similar to Haskell. Have you seen Haskell before?
I heard about it, but I didn't get the chance to use one. But I really want to experiment with those sometime because it's really a different way to write code and program.
Yeah, I think Elm does it really nicely. Like, because the thing is, when you're working with JavaScript, things just kind of break, and there's no way to really know other than open up the console and see the error there for the most part. But the way that Elm works is it does compile on the JavaScript, but you write in this very annoying style, basically similar to what you have, where it's like compile time. No, you have to handle all of the cases, kind of like Rust. You have to handle all the cases. Except with
Yeah,
Rust,
I see.
you can actually get out of it by just unwrapping. But with Elm, you actually have to handle it, which is nice because your code basically will always keep working. Even if there's a quote unquote bug, it won't ever like crap out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like that's why I really like it a lot. But yeah, It is a little bit annoying, like the handle.
Yeah, and it also makes it easier to code because you don't need to go back to your data structure and say, wait, so this can be this shouldn't be that. No, you don't need to do that. It's already defined in one neat place, which is your model class.
Yeah. So actually, sorry. Well, I kind of want to go back just a little bit. I'm thinking about like these types that have the validation on them, right? We talked about the age, like you have to have a certain age in order to be valid. But let's go back to string like a username that's more clear. So, for instance, you could say, all right, a username has to be a string of all alphanumeric characters,
Yeah,
and it has to have at least 3 characters and cannot be more than 20. Right? Let's just say those are the validations.
yeah, exactly. You can add any number of validations and organize them in multiple steps and all that in your model class.
Now the question I have is it possible to have just only 2 types? Because you mentioned that, okay, this one, like, if it's too long, then return like too long sealed class. Like, is it possible to say, okay, invalid, and then like a list of all the things that are invalid? Because if I put in like just like an exclamation mark, in the case I just gave you, it's less than 3 characters. It's not alphanumeric, it's an exclamation mark, it's a symbol. And it's obviously, like in that case, 2 out of 3 of the validations would actually fail. So is there a way that I could have returned just one class with all of the errors on it, or do I have to have a different class per error to return back?
No, so um, how validations are structured in models is that you have different steps, validation steps that one step is running after the other. So for example, you could have the first step in your validation, in your validation logic, is to verify things like having a blank username or invalid characters or things like that. And then have another step for things like the username is not available, or so verifying the availability of the username. And then each step corresponds to a union case. So you're really free uh, to add as many steps as you want and organize your validations as you want so that you get exactly what you want. Do you want these validations and their corresponding failures to be represented by one class or multiple classes? That's your choice.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking like I would like to return something that has all the errors rather than have, like one by one. That could be a little bit annoying. Like because we all have had like the time where, you try to maybe create an account, you enter in your password. Okay, not long enough. Okay, you enter in a longer password. Okay, too long maybe. Oh, okay. And then, oh, it doesn't have enough characters. Okay. Oh, it doesn't have enough numbers, doesn't have enough symbols. It gets annoying to keep trying and trying and trying, right?
Oh, I see
So you
what
kind
you're
of want
saying.
to check as many cases as possible and then return back to them and say, okay, these are what's wrong. Not enough characters, you had to be alphanumeric, etc., etc.
Yeah,
That's kind of what I'm trying to look for, is that you want to at least for the front end, you want to cause the least amount of friction, right? Or even in the back end too, you kind of want to see all the things that are wrong with it, so that you can properly. I don't know. You already understand what I mean, right? You want to kind of have the least amount of friction with the user.
yeah, I get you. Like instead of separating the errors and have and handling each one at a time, you handle them all at once. So you don't keep making keep having failures and then the next failure. So um, I think you can do this with models by just organizing your failures in a way that you could have, for example, a failure that wraps other failures. So, uh, so you could group the failures that you want to have together into one failure and then return that, for example. But I'll have to code that to 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 give you an example of the of a use case. Like it's hard to think about it on the fly.
Yeah, I mean, because that's basically what I'm looking for. Because there's so many. I mean, every single time that I do this, I would love to have all the errors to kind of show the user what's going on.
Yeah, I see.
It's like, can you imagine like doing all this stuff and at the end you have a valid password and then it says, "Oh, sorry, username taken." It's like, oh,
Yeah,
I give up. I don't want to do this anymore. That's what I would say.
yeah, I see. But there is already some flexibility with the validations, and you could group them into steps, different steps, and each validation returns a failure. So you could do things like, as I said, grouping some failures into one, into some kinds of failures into one failure case. So you'll have things like sealed classes of sealed classes, like some hierarchy for your failures.
Okay.
But the problem with that is that you'll in this case it doesn't matter because the string is the operations on the strings and regex matching and all of that are not very expensive, but computing wise. But sometimes you want to separate your validations and run one after the other so that you don't have any lag or performance issue.
Okay. But let's kind of roll back a little bit too. What I did notice is that okay, so out of the box, it sounds like you have to use freeze, right? You don't have your own kind of implementation of a freeze-like thing. You have to use freeze, is what I understand.
Uh, you don't need to use freeze specifically. You can use anything for to any kind of package to create sealed classes. It's just required for the failures because your failure should be immutable and should be sealed classes. So you could be using, for example, the new Dart3 sealed classes or other packages like Dart mappable. I think it has support for sealed classes. And yeah, you're free to use whatever you want. Any data class and union generator would work.
Okay. But you also have to have build runner. I mean, of course, besides that one, but for yours too, because that's also going to be generating some code, right?
Yeah, you need build runner because it's a code generator. I don't know how it will be with the when static metaprogramming is introduced, and I hope I will be able to migrate the package then to using static metaprogramming so that you don't have the problem of having to generate your code. But for me personally, the advantages that this package offers are so great that I don't have a problem with code generators, with using a code generator because you can't do this manually. Like you can't have these sealed classes. You can't manually write them, or at least it will be very difficult with a lot of code. So yeah, it's functionality that is not available without a code generator.
Well, I mean, the problem I have with build runner is it does take some time to run, right?
Yeah,
And I think you can turn it on, take some time to run, and then it will like rebuild when it sees changes, right?
yeah, you can use the watch command for that, and it will automatically rebuild every time you make changes.
Yeah, that's the nice part, but yeah, it's still that initial run. And also the other issue I have with the build runner is it's the command is not so clear compared to other ones like Flutter build, Flutter run is very simple, but it's like Flutter pub run build runner or
Yeah,
something. It's been a while. Basically, I have to Google search for it, and then I remember it, then I copy it, paste it in the README, and then I just forget. And if I forget again, I just go back to the README and copy paste and go again.
yeah, that's relatable. But I have a VS Code plugin for commands that I use frequently, and then I name them. I type them in the command bar, and then I just run them directly. So you could do that with your IDE.
I mean, when did you? So I kind of want to roll back just a tiny bit, right? Um, for domain driven design, when did you first hear about this, and what kind of attracted you to actually use it?
I think I first heard about it like 2 years ago. I was building an app, and then quickly enough, I noticed that it was not maintainable, and So it's really hard to introduce new features without breaking previous ones, and testing the UI, testing the business logic, things like that. So it was what you basically call spaghetti code. So I started looking into app architectures. I explored some ones, but I quickly found domain-driven design. Like, there was a very famous tutorial of Coder. It was a DDD and Firebase and DDD series, something like that. It had some 100K views. So I followed that, and I really like the concepts it introduced, because it's made my code much more clear and very easy to reason about, to maintain, and to test.
Yeah, I really love Riso Coder's courses. I didn't see the Firebase one because I didn't really use Firebase for a while, but I did like his separation of kind of concerns. And I remember in the course that I seen, at least when he was working with Block, is like he did use the Union class. I don't think he used Freeze, but he definitely used the Union class to the Union package to generate like, okay, success and then like error, this one. It's super nice. And I think that Riverpod also builds upon that, right? Where they kind of have this three section: success, error, loading. So it's kind of
Yeah,
like
exactly.
it's super powerful that you have this compile time thing, and you have to handle all cases when you use like the .when function, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That's map, and that's when function.
Okay, so this is kind of another good question I think I have is models, right? This is strictly a Dart thing. Like if I just wanted just to write a simple Dart program, I could use your package. Is that right? It doesn't require Flutter, right?
Nope, it doesn't have any dependency on Flutter. You could use it with a pure Dart project, um, because it's just really just objects at the end of the day, self-validated objects, and it uses a mix of some mixins and interfaces to make this kind of multi-inheritance work, like with using just pure Dart code.
Okay, that's awesome. Now, if I were to use this in Flutter, is there any limitations I need to kind of keep in mind? Like it doesn't work well with certain state managements or something like that?
Uh, you don't need to do anything special, really. It can work with any kind of state management solution you have. Um, if you already use domain-driven design, it will be you'll just basically replace your value objects and entities with ones provided by models, and you'll be good to go. If you're not using DDD and you like the package, you can also just use them directly and make them fit in your workflow and app architecture.
Okay. Now, I mean, when you put this into your, I mean, you're using this within your Flutter apps yourself, right?
Yeah.
Are you? I mean, do you use like Riverpod or something like that with it? Like, do you have some recommendations that you think works really well?
Yeah, for me personally, I use so pure domain-driven design. I have three main layers: the infrastructure layer, which is connected to the outside world, like databases and the server. I have the domain layer, which is the center of the app. It doesn't have any dependency on the other layers. It contains all the business logic and the validation logic. So that's where I put my models. And then I have the presentation layer, which combines the views and widgets and the states, their states. So um, for the presentation layer, I use Riverpod because I like the simplicity of it, and it doesn't have boilerplate code. Uh, but you could be using Block. It's like the same principle. You have your states and your views. I think with Block you also have the events. In Riverpod, it's integrated. It's handled automatically. Yeah. So what I do is that I have my models that I instantiate and I pass around in the app. For example, I could be fetching some data from the server, like some user profile data, I will need to validate it because yeah, about this. Some people think that you shouldn't validate server data because like it's coming from the server, so it must be valid. But what they forget is that you can have multiple app versions, and so sometimes your app will not be expecting some kind of data, and you'll have to handle that. So that's why it's important to validate also server data. So coming back to my example, I could have some data coming from the server, and it might be incompatible. For example, let's say users in my app didn't need to have a username, but now in the new version they do need to have a username. So I need to make sure they do. With models, I will have a user entity which will hold value objects such as username, email, and so on, all the data pieces that I need. And after fetching the user profile data from the server, I will create an instance of the model and then pass it to the UI. Using Riverpod, I will probably store it in a provider, but and then access that provider from the UI. But the same principle applies for the other state management methods. So in the UI, I would then be able to map between the different validation states of the user profile, the user entity. So, for example, I could have a widget that displays the user profile. So it will be expecting a valid user union case, the valid union case of the user entity. And I could have another widget that displays some kind of error message if the user profile data is incomplete, and so that widget will expect the invalid union case. Or maybe I could be automatically redirecting to the screen for editing the profile data if some data needs to be changed or updated. So yeah, I could do anything with my model once I get it. I pass it to the presentation layer. So you can see how the data flows nicely from the server to the UI without any kind of overhead, and I'm able to handle all cases in a declarative way.
Okay. Yeah, I was listening to what you were saying, and some thoughts kind of came to my mind about validity, right? So if we could kind of go back to like valid user, having a valid username, valid password, this kind of stuff, right? Now, let's say that something like, I don't know, what would you call that? A bio or something like that. You know, like if you can write a paragraph about yourself to kind of introduce yourself to other people. Um, I don't know. Is it possible that you could say have like an invalid bio? Like, can you have some fields within a user that are invalid, but that doesn't actually invalidate the user itself? If that makes sense. I'm just trying to think. Like, let's say that if you have a bio there, obviously you want that to be valid, but I guess that would mean that you can have an invalid bio with invalid data. It's either no data, which is valid, or data that's valid, right? I'm trying to think if there could be a situation where you'd want to have a valid object, but one of the pieces of it could be invalid. It's probably not possible. And also maybe a little bit weird question. Well, sorry, let me kind of roll back a little bit because I'm thinking about your particular case. As you were talking, I was thinking in my mind like about data, right? So if you have a system, let's say you have I don't know, an older version of the app or even a newer version of the app and the API doesn't quite match, you may have some data pieces missing. And so based on that, you'd want to handle that, right? So it's like, okay, this is a user, but in the new version of the API, which we're looking for, we're expecting there to be, I don't know, a birthday, but we didn't collect birthdays before. You know what I'm saying? Like, is there possible that you could have something like this?
Yeah, of course. Like you add validations for everything for um, like for example, you said that you need to check that the birthday is available, right? Because the new versions of the app requires to have birthday. So in your new version, you just create your birthday value object, and you'll handle the invalid case appropriately. So I don't know, maybe you'll redirect the the user to a page where he could add his birthday or things like that.
Okay, yeah, I guess it's more simple than I thought. I was just trying to think of a situation where maybe you would have invalid data, but you'd kind of want that, and then like you would just not show that. Like I don't know, I don't know. I guess maybe I'm thinking too much. Maybe it's actually a lot simpler than my mind is thinking.
You're free to do whatever you want to do with your models at the end of the day. Like even if you have, for example, an invalid user, you could still access its fields and then handle each field accordingly. You could have one. You could, for example, ignore like the invalid bio. If it's invalid, you just ignore it, or you don't show it at all. But it doesn't mean that you wouldn't show the username to or other user profile things that you need to show.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So not only could something be invalid, but maybe it's still usable. You have to kind of check to see what's invalid about it.
Right, yeah.
Right.
And you have full access of that with models. Like uh, one thing that I really like about this kind of structure, which is not just coming from models, but also from DDD, is like you have this whole data structure made of entities and value objects that like you can explore and yeah, delve into as much as you want. You can uh, you can move from the upper entity to another to some value object it contains or some other entities it contains and handle like and access all the pieces of your data in a declarative way.
Okay. Now, I mean, looking at this, it's quite nice, but I'm thinking to myself like, okay, if I wanted to convert this thing to JSON, right? And let's go back to the simple one of username, age. Obviously, username would be a string, age is a integer. I mean, but we don't have those, right? So how does that work? Is it that you have to go through and kind of define how to encode and decode those things? You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, so yeah, I understand what you're saying. So models is not a data class generator like freezed or things like that. So or JSON serializable and other packages like that. So it doesn't handle JSON serialization and deserialization, but it's kind of intended because in domain-driven design, your uh, your models don't change with time. They are constant. You put them in the domain layer and you don't change them like because some server data changed or things like that. Like they don't care about the structure of your data in the server or in your local database. They are the center of your app and the UI layer and the other layers depend on them. But for things like JSON deserialization and serialization, they they often change. Like you so what you do with the in domain driven design is you create objects called DTOs, data transform objects, I think, transfer objects. So these are the classes that are responsible for converting your raw data that comes from the server to your models, to instances of your models. And for these DTOs, you can use you can either do it manually or use packages like JSON serializable. And then you'd have to manually create methods that convert the DTO to a model. So you'd name them, for example, toModel, and it converts the DTO to your model, and another one that converts your model to a DTO. So you'll name it fromModel. And yeah, so these are, you'll put these in the infrastructure layer, and they would frequently change with the changes that you have in your the databases and servers.
Okay, yeah, DTO. I remember this now. You know, I was reading a book about domain-driven design using F# from Pragmatic Programmers quite a few years ago, and I remember this term. But I also remember as working in the programming language I usually work in every day, there often is this idea where you have boundaries, right? And that the outside world is unclean. And so you have these kind of like, I don't know what the heck you call that, but they're like outside data structs, data objects, I guess you can call them. And those accept the data you're looking for. And then also, then you have DTOs or something like that. You have some way to change that to your internal structure.
Yeah, you reminded me of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's actually very common, right? So it's like, even though, because the thing is like your internal structure could be quite different, right? You could be saving your data in your database in one format, working with the same data in another format, and also requesting data in another format from users, right?
But then your model stays the same. So the DTOs are the one that converts that data to your model that stays unchanged. So the advantage with that is that you don't, if for example there is some change in your server data structure, like some fields have a different name or things like that, you don't need to update code in the UI layer, because it doesn't depend on the infrastructure layer. It depends on your models on the domain layer that's say unchanged. So you'll only need to change those classes you talked about. I forgot their names. Yeah, those classes that are on the outside, that deal with the outside data, and also update your DTO so that they correctly convert those classes to your models.
Well, the other thing too, right? Like even those three different types I'm talking about, you could have a user represented differently depending upon which part of the system you're in, right? You're looking a little bit confused, but have you heard this before?
I didn't get you. Like
okay, so let's kind of step back for a moment, right? So let's say in your database you have a user. The user has an ID. I think most countries have like an like an ID number, right, for your ID card, like say passport number, something like that, right? You have obviously name, first name, last name, middle name could be. You have an age or a date of birth. But let's say that you have like one part of your system which is sending notifications. That only needs the user's first and last name, or maybe even just first name. So when you pull from the database, you're just pulling, okay, let's pull their first name, let's pull their email address. And then we have the message, right? I don't know anything about ID card number or passport number. I don't know anything about their birthday. And I don't even, like, it never gets brought up, right? So when you pass that data struct, like, so originally the database has those things, but that part of the system, the notification part of the system, only knows, okay, a user is, name and email. You know what I mean? Like you have a separate object that represents the same thing. So it's a subset.
And maybe it could have a different format or things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there must be a name for that. Like I remember seeing this in the Triple D book, and it's quite interesting. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Like you should never pass kind of more data than you need to. According to this system, this module or context, whatever, knows what a user is. It's this type. And then this part knows a user as that type. and obviously they don't need to know everything about the user. So you should be passing in kind of a subset of the data that's only required of what you need.
Yeah, right. I also forgot their names, but it's exactly this. You create some simple data classes that that contain only the fields that you need to send, for example, to the server or to the notification service. And the DTOs, the other classes we talked about, are the ones responsible for converting your clean data, your models to these classes.
Yeah.
So you have the freedom to add as many classes that you want. Yeah, we don't have their names.
Yeah, I mean, in your documentation, do you list all these official names or no?
My documentation doesn't really delve into DDD practices. Like it's just talks about value objects and entities and how to use the package because it can be used with any kind of app architecture. But so these classes we're talking about are more specific to domain-driven design.
Okay. Yeah, I'm almost thinking like maybe it would be good to actually add that in because this stuff is quite interesting and I like the idea. It's just very radically different than most people, right? Most people are like, okay, here's my user. My user is everything, like stuff that things shouldn't know about, but okay, it's my user, pass it in, like, and that can be tricky, right? But that's like how you start that's how you start having like leaks of data that shouldn't be coming out, private information being put in the wrong place.
With models, you will have one user model, generally speaking, because yeah, it will be one that holds all the values you need in your app. But then in the other layer, the infrastructure layer that deals with the outside world and the server data and things like that, that's where we would put additional data classes for each kind of service and what it needs. That's why I think it's a little bit different. Like I can't really address it in the documentation, but I would love if someone makes a tutorial series about it, about domain-driven design, an updated one. Maybe I'll do it if I have some time in the future. I'm not sure, but uh, yeah, it would be great because Risocoder's tutorial is quite outdated, and we need someone to update the code and make a new version.
I thought that would be you, right? I mean, you're really into domain-driven design. That's a good opportunity for you to also get the package out there and for people to
Yeah,
be using it. If you can show them how to use this in a triple D way, right?
yeah, I'll try to do that. I don't have much experience with making tutorials, but I hope I will get over that and make one.
There's a first time for everything. Have you heard that expression?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So, but well, that's the nice part about the Flutter community is that, they're open for new things and open for people to try and they give feedback. And it's not like some other communities where the feedback is really negative. They definitely give you some support on, how to make it better, etc.
Yeah, that's true.
So the hardest part is starting. I can tell you this one right now. Everything. Same as this podcast. The hardest part is just to start it.
Yeah.
After that, the second hardest part is to keep doing it. That's the other second hardest part. So, yeah, I mean, same with the package, right? For me, I don't know if I'd ever be able to create a package because I don't even, first of all, I don't have any really good ideas of something I want to create. Second of all, like, yeah, there's a lot of effort involved in that.
Yeah.
Some things I don't even know. And the other thing that worries me too is my people looking at my code also makes me a little bit nervous.
Yeah, that's true.
Your coding is so private, right?
Yeah. You feel kind of insecure. This is why I had to go through, like, I made two prototypes before making this version because I couldn't just put out something that that I didn't really clean up and document very well. Like I I went over all the code, cleaned it up. I documented every function. I made sure that my variables names and method names made sense because I don't want people diving into the code base and finding that things are unstructured or don't make sense or are difficult to understand. I wanted for everybody to be able to just dive in and contribute if they want, or just learn about how to make a package like Modddels, that a code generation package. Yeah, so that's why I had to make prototype before putting out this final version.
Okay. Yeah. Now I'm kind of curious. Like, you spent all that time getting it ready. When you released the package, did you find that you missed some things, or people pointed them out to you, or nothing? Nothing like that happened.
Um, I knew that I would miss a few things, a few features, but for now there is no real issue. Like no bugs have been discovered. It's really hard with the code generation packages to make sure that the generated code is always valid and has a valid syntax. But I made sure that everything is kind of wrapped into templates, and everything is well structured and the code base is very clean. And I added a lot of integration tests and source gen tests to make sure that I don't miss something. And I had to create a set of utilities to be able to write the integration tests, because there are different model kinds. So I had to run those tests on all model kinds, and I couldn't write them manually each time. So that was hard too, but I managed to get my integration tests running on all model kinds now. And I still have some tests to write, but yeah, I think the package is pretty well-rounded now in terms of features, and also in terms of bugs and things like that. It's pretty safe to use.
You say that the package is pretty well rounded. Like, does that mean that there's no more features that you plan to add, or things that are coming up in the timeline?
There are already some open issues on GitHub about some enhancements I want to bring, and there is the new Dart tree features that I really want to bring, like take advantage of the built-in sealed classes. So I would reduce some and completely remove some dependencies like equatable, and also hopefully reduce the generated code size. There is also the record types that I want to support. I don't really know how the community would like to use records in the context of models, so hopefully I will get some community adoption and feedback to guide me for that. And yeah, I'm open to any feedback, and and any suggestions from the community, and I'll be glad and happy to discuss changes and things that all of you want to implement.
That's great. I mean, we're kind of running a little bit low on time. I just kind of wanted to ask: is there something else that you think that we didn't cover about models that you wanted to discuss before we start to wrap up?
I think that uh, anyone should give models a try, because I couldn't really very well explain what it is about, like, because it's mainly code. Things are, when I say pattern matching and things like that, it can seem a little bit abstract, but really it's just code. So if you try it, you'll really get what it's about, and hopefully you'll like to use it in your applications and in your projects. But other than that, I think we've covered pretty much all the topics I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, there is one more thing I have to say, and I admitted to you already, right? I didn't read through everything. I kind of skimmed it and was trying to understand how it works. But for sure, I have to say that um, I don't know if I could say it's the most documented, but definitely very well documented, very well put together package in terms of documentation and written kind of what do you call that? You know, the website you created, there's a lot of explanation there, and I think that's great. Um, for me, like if I'm sitting there going to want to use this package, I would love to kind of read through all of it top to bottom. Like it reminds me a lot of Riverpod. Riverpod, they have their own website, and they have a very similar style where they very good much go into depth and they cover nearly everything, like how to test, how to use it, etc. And I think you have the same style. I'm not sure if you used Riverpod as a inspiration, but I really like that in a package. If when you have a whole website dedicated to it, and it makes it something that I love to dig into when I need to use a package.
Right, I'm glad you liked the documentation. I spent a lot of time on it, like probably creating that documentation plus documenting the code base and structuring it took me around 40% of the development time. But I think it was worth it, not only for me, but also for everybody who wants to join and contribute on the project.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I love the package. I like the idea. I need to get back. I want to now. I want to get back into triple D, domain driven design, and then take a look at your package again, so I can see if I something I maybe I want to start bringing to my projects. So, but yeah, I like it. Um, maybe could add more triple D stuff to it with these transformers and everything else someday. But in any case, thank you for coming out to the show, and I'm happy to kind of introduce the world to Modddels, and I like seeing this kind of work, and I'm hoping that maybe other people will enjoy what you have and will use it, and it keeps going on.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.